The sky above the kingdom was heavy with storm clouds, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Thunder rolled across the jagged mountains and lightning danced over the towers of the Alpha King's palace. Within the walls, the corridors were dimly lit by flickering torches, their shadows crawling like restless spirits across cold stone. In this place of power, fear and reverence intertwined, for the Alpha King ruled not only with strength, but with a presence that made even the bravest knights pause. The king was known for his icy demeanor, his voice carrying the weight of storms, his eyes sharp and calculating. Legend said his heart had been tempered by tragedy, and that no one could approach him without trembling. Many had tried to claim his favor, but none had succeeded. The court whispered of curses that clung to him, invisible chains that would one day consume him if a bride of rare virtue and courage did not walk by his side. Far beyond the palace, in a quiet village tucked between the forest and rolling hills, a young woman lived a life of simplicity. She was not known for beauty in the way the nobles described it. Her hair was dark and plain, her eyes calm and observant rather than sparkling with obvious charm. She moved with quiet grace, unnoticed by those who judged by appearances, but she carried a wisdom born of solitude and survival. The villagers often overlooked her, and in some ways she had learned to blend into the shadows. Yet there was a spark within her, small but steady, a spark no one could see until it was tested by fire. The news came like a bolt from the stormy sky. The Alpha King would choose his bride, and her name had been sent forward by a mysterious decree. The village stirred with confusion. Why her? She was plain, quiet, and had no influence. She was not like the daughters of the wealthy families who had always dreamed of palace life. Yet the decree was clear. She was to prepare herself and journey to the kingdom. On the night before she departed, she stood outside her small home, staring at the horizon, where the storm seemed to stretch endlessly. A strange mixture of fear and curiosity filled her chest. She wondered what awaited her in that palace of shadows and whispers. Could someone like her truly change the fate of a king? She did not know, but deep inside she felt that her life had been leading to this moment, an unseen current drawing her toward something vast and dangerous. The journey to the palace was long and arduous. Rain fell in heavy sheets and the wind howled through the trees as if warning her to turn back. But she pressed on, guided by determination rather than hope. At the gates of the palace, the guards looked her over with raised eyebrows, whispering among themselves. She felt the weight of their judgment but walked with her head held high. She would not falter, not even in the face of uncertainty. Inside the great hall, the Alpha King awaited, seated upon his throne like a storm made flesh. The room was vast, its ceilings lost in shadow, chandeliers flickering like distant stars. The courtiers bowed and murmured, their faces masks of curiosity and caution. She approached, each step echoing through the silent chamber. The king's eyes fell upon her, sharp and assessing, as though he were peering not just at her body but into the depths of her soul. He saw a plain figure at first, as he expected. But there was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence, a calm determination that did not beg for attention. It intrigued him more than he wanted to admit. He had ruled through strength and fear, and yet here was someone who stood before him unafraid. He did not smile, but a shadow of curiosity crossed his features. The ceremony was brief but heavy with tradition. The young woman knelt before the king, her hands outstretched in pledge. As she did, a subtle shimmer of light glimmered around her fingers, almost imperceptible, but enough to catch the king's sharp eyes. For a moment the world seemed to pause. He looked closer, studying the faint aura that danced at her fingertips. There was magic here, yes, but not the kind that could be wielded with pride or arrogance. It was restrained, quiet, patient, and it was powerful. The king straightened, masking his astonishment with a practiced composure. He had seen many people, powerful sorcerers, cunning advisors, bold warriors, and yet none had sparked a flicker of curiosity in him like this woman did. He reminded himself that appearances could be deceiving. He had learned that lesson long ago, and still a part of him could not help but wonder what lay beneath her quiet exterior. During the feast that followed, the courtiers whispered behind their fans and hands. They speculated about the king's new bride, laughing softly at what they considered a mismatched union. "She is plain," one whispered. "What can she possibly offer him?" Another shook her head. "Surely he cannot see her worth." The woman heard none of this. She moved through the room with humility, yet her presence was like a ripple in still water, subtle, but impossible to ignore. The king watched her from across the hall, noting how she interacted with the staff, the children of the court, and even the creatures of the palace gardens that wandered close to the walls. She spoke softly to them, her voice calm and steady, showing respect without servility. And when a small creature, a fox with eyes like molten gold, approached the table where she sat, she did not flinch. Instead, she extended a hand, letting it sniff her fingers. The king's eyes narrowed slightly. Few had dared approach him with such courage. As night deepened, the palace fell into quiet. Torches burned low in the halls, and shadows stretched across the walls. The king retreated to his private chambers, but sleep did not come easily. He thought of the woman, of the faint shimmer he had glimpsed, of the steady courage she carried. There was a tension in his chest, unfamiliar and unsettling. He was a man used to control, to knowing the course of all things, yet here was someone whose depths he could not measure. Meanwhile, the young woman stood by the balcony of her own chambers, gazing out at the storm-laden sky. She could hear the distant roll of thunder and feel the palace trembling slightly beneath the wind's assault. A mixture of fear and determination coursed through her. She had not come here to please anyone or to claim favor. She had come to fulfill a destiny she did not fully understand, and if she could endure the storm within the palace walls, she could endure anything. The next morning, the ceremony for her official unveiling awaited. The hall would be filled with nobles, advisors, and spies, all eager to see if the rumors of her plainness were true. The king, however, prepared himself in silence, his thoughts tangled between expectation and curiosity. What had she truly come to offer? Was she merely a pawn in the web of prophecy or something far greater? When she was led into the hall, she walked with calm resolve. Her eyes met the king's, steady and unafraid. The courtiers gasped softly at her appearance, not for her beauty, which was subtle, but for the quiet power she carried in every gesture, every glance. The king's heart, long encased in ice, stirred with a feeling he had not known in years, something unpredictable, something alive. Then in the midst of the hall, as the ceremonial veil was to be lifted, the light of the sun broke through a parting in the storm clouds. It fell upon her face, and for a fleeting heartbeat, her true form, her hidden radiance, shimmered before every eye. Not beauty in the shallow sense, but a brilliance that spoke of courage, resilience, and magic. The court murmured in astonishment, and even the king felt a moment of disbelief. He forced himself to mask his emotions, though his pulse quickened and his mind raced. This woman, this seemingly ordinary woman, was no ordinary person at all. Something powerful and mysterious stirred beneath her quiet exterior, and for the first time he questioned his assumptions. What had he truly brought into his life, and could he control the storm that was coming, both outside the palace and within his own heart? As the ceremony ended, she knelt again before him, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. And though he said nothing, the king's mind could not stop turning, seeking to understand the depth of her presence. The palace walls, the thunder, the flickering torches all seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next move in a story that had only just begun. The storm outside raged on, echoing the storm within the king's mind. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the hall, a faint shimmer lingered, a promise that this union would not be what anyone expected. The Alpha King, for all his power, had met a force he could not yet comprehend, and the young woman, the one the world had overlooked, knew that her journey had only just begun. The kingdom waited. And so did the storm. The morning after the ceremony, the palace seemed quieter than usual, yet the air was heavy with anticipation. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, exchanging uncertain glances and murmured theories. Many could not understand why the Alpha King had chosen someone so seemingly ordinary. Some laughed quietly, believing she would fade into the shadows as all others had. But the king's eyes followed her every movement, sharp and observant, betraying a curiosity he could not yet name. The young woman awoke to the soft light of dawn streaming through her window. The rain from the night before had left a silver sheen on the palace gardens, and the air was fragrant with wet earth and blooming flowers. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the day ahead. The halls of the palace were unfamiliar, vast and echoing with the footsteps of servants, guards, and courtiers. She had come prepared not to impress but to survive, to observe, and to learn. The king appeared in the courtyard as the morning light touched the stone. His presence was as commanding as ever, the weight of his authority unmistakable. He did not smile, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than protocol demanded. It was a quiet moment, almost imperceptible yet charged with tension. She met his gaze calmly, not out of defiance but with quiet certainty. That morning she walked through the palace gardens alone, a rare moment of peace before the day's responsibilities. She moved among the sculpted hedges and fountains, noticing small details others often overlooked: a broken tile, a struggling plant, a bird that had lost its way. Each observation was noted, stored quietly in her mind. She understood the importance of patience, of watching before acting. The king observed her from a distance, hidden behind a column. He saw how she interacted with the environment, how her hands moved with care and precision. For a man used to commanding armies and bending nations to his will, this simple attention to detail was strangely compelling. He had ruled through power and fear, yet here was someone whose strength was quiet, subtle, and impossible to ignore. Later, the court convened in the great hall for the first council since the ceremony. Advisors and nobles sat stiffly, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and fear. The king spoke with his usual authority, outlining matters of the kingdom, the threat of rival territories and the lingering shadows that haunted the land. The young woman listened quietly, her mind absorbing every word. She did not interrupt, did not boast, yet every so often, her gaze met the king's and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of intelligence, of insight, of potential. A sudden alarm interrupted the meeting. A messenger arrived, breathless and soaked from the rain. A disturbance had been reported in the northern forest near the borderlands. Villagers spoke of strange shadows moving among the trees, whispers that chilled even the bravest hearts. The king rose immediately, his expression darkening. He had faced many threats, both human and supernatural, but something about this news unsettled him. Without hesitation, the young woman stepped forward. Her voice was calm and measured, offering a suggestion to send a small discreet party to investigate rather than mobilizing the entire army at once. Many in the court scoffed at her, but the king paused. There was logic in her words, a clarity he had not expected. He inclined his head slightly, approving her counsel. As the investigation party prepared to depart, the king watched her closely. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking supplies, ensuring that the men and women chosen were capable and trustworthy. Her presence was steadying, her authority subtle yet undeniable. The soldiers, initially skeptical, began to respect her guidance, sensing the calm strength she carried within. That night, the young woman wandered the palace halls, her mind restless. She had noticed subtle signs of unrest, shadows that did not belong, whispers in the dark, and an undercurrent of tension that ran deeper than the political struggles of the court. She understood that her role was more than ceremonial. She had been chosen for a reason, and the weight of that realization pressed upon her. The king, meanwhile, retired to his private chambers, yet sleep eluded him. He could not stop thinking about her, about the way she had spoken during the council, the calm decisiveness she displayed, and the faint shimmer he had glimpsed around her hands during the ceremony. He was a man used to control, to knowing the outcome of every situation, yet here was someone whose depths he could not measure. The curiosity in his heart grew, mingling with a feeling he had long buried, respect and perhaps even a trace of admiration. Over the following days, the young woman adapted to palace life. She learned the routines, studied the maps of the kingdom, and observed the court with quiet vigilance. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight, shaping discussions and decisions without the need for flamboyance or display. The nobles began to notice, some grudgingly, that perhaps she was not as ordinary as they had assumed. One evening, the king summoned her to the palace gardens. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the fountains and hedges. The air was still, carrying a hint of magic as if the night itself were watching. She approached, her steps measured, and he did not rise to greet her. He remained seated on a stone bench, the shadows framing him like a living storm. "You have been observing," he said, his voice calm but edged with intensity. "And you speak only when necessary. Why?" She considered her words carefully. "Because actions speak louder than words," she replied softly. "And because some truths must be understood before they can be spoken." The king regarded her silently, intrigued. Few had ever answered him in such a manner. Her courage was not reckless but measured, precise. It unsettled him in ways he could not yet name. He had spent a lifetime expecting obedience, yet here was someone who commanded attention without demanding it. A rustling in the hedges drew their attention. A small dark figure emerged, a fox with eyes like molten gold, the same creature she had encountered on her first day in the palace. It approached her cautiously, as if recognizing her presence as safe. She knelt and extended a hand. The fox sniffed her fingers and then, with quiet trust, curled at her feet. The king watched, fascinated. She had a way with creatures with life that he had never mastered. There was a softness to her strength, a quiet command that was far more dangerous than any sword. Days turned into weeks, and the disturbances in the northern forest grew more troubling. Shadows moved among the trees, and whispers of dark magic reached even the most distant villages. The young woman insisted on accompanying the investigation party, not out of defiance, but because she understood that some threats required presence, observation, and patience. The king did not forbid her, though he did not speak. Instead, he allowed her to take part, curious to see how she would navigate danger. As they entered the forest, the air grew heavy and cold. Mist clung to the trees, and the sunlight was filtered through a gray veil. Every step seemed to echo, every sound amplified by the stillness. The young woman moved carefully, her senses alert. She noticed symbols carved into the bark of the trees, faint patterns that suggested magic older than the kingdom itself. She knelt to examine them, her fingers tracing the runes with a practiced hand. The king watched silently, noting her attention to detail and the calm decisiveness of her actions. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the path ahead. The soldiers drew their weapons, tension gripping the group. The young woman stepped forward, her voice steady. "Wait, observe first. Do not act rashly." The king's eyes narrowed, but he allowed her to proceed. She moved closer to the shadow, her calm presence guiding the men. As the figure emerged, it became clear that it was not human but some creature of the forest, its eyes glowing faintly in the mist. She did not recoil. Instead, she spoke softly, and the creature hesitated, sensing her authority. The king felt a jolt of surprise and admiration. Few had ever faced such a presence without fear, yet she did so with ease. Her hidden strength, her quiet power, was becoming impossible to ignore, and though he would not admit it, a seed of respect and something deeper was taking root in his heart. As they returned to the palace, the forest's shadows seeming to follow them in memory, the king remained silent, lost in thought. The young woman, unaware of the storm she had stirred within him, moved with quiet dignity, her mind already considering the next steps, the next challenges, the next mysteries of the palace and kingdom. That night, as the palace slept, a faint shimmer lingered in the corners of the hallways and gardens, the echo of her presence, her power, and the promise of the trials yet to come. The Alpha King, for all his control and command, realized that his assumptions had been wrong. He had believed her to be ordinary, perhaps even insignificant. But now he knew there was more, far more waiting to be revealed, and the kingdom itself, silent under the watchful stars, seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would unfold when the hidden strength of the young woman met the might of the Alpha King. The days following their journey to the northern forest were tense, filled with whispered speculations and unspoken observations. The palace had settled into a fragile rhythm, yet the young woman's presence seemed to ripple through its walls like wind through the trees. Courtiers continued to judge her, some with scorn, others with curiosity, but the Alpha King noticed something that none of them could see. She was changing the palace subtly and quietly, and no one, not even he, could deny her growing influence. The forest had revealed more than shadows. Strange symbols and ancient magic lingered in the air, whispering secrets to those who knew how to listen. The young woman spent hours studying them, her fingers tracing the faint runes etched into the stone walls of the palace library, deciphering patterns that suggested danger and promise in equal measure. She had an intuitive understanding of the world's hidden currents, of life that existed just beyond sight, and the Alpha King, ever vigilant, watched her with a mixture of intrigue and caution. One evening he found her alone in the palace garden once again. Moonlight bathed the fountains in silver, casting long, delicate shadows across the pathways. She was crouched beside a small pond, her hands hovering above the water's surface as if feeling the currents within it. When she noticed the king, she did not startle or bow. She only looked at him with calm, steady eyes. You are quiet, he said, his voice low but firm. Too quiet for someone in a palace full of whispers. I observe, she replied softly. The world speaks in ways that words cannot capture. He studied her for a long moment, noting the way her shoulders relaxed even in the presence of his authority. Many would tremble under his gaze, but she did not. Her serenity was a challenge and an invitation all at once. He felt a stirring in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. Curiosity mingled with something that might be respect, or perhaps something far more dangerous, admiration. The kingdom's troubles, however, were far from over. Rumors of a dark force gathering beyond the northern hills reached the court. Villagers spoke of nights without stars, of shadows that moved independently, of creatures glimpsed only in the corner of one's vision. The king knew that strength alone would not be enough to face this threat. The cunning, the insight, the wisdom of another mind would be required, and he could not deny that the young woman possessed these qualities. When the next council was convened, the young woman spoke with measured clarity. She outlined strategies, anticipated threats, and offered solutions that the seasoned advisors had overlooked. The king observed silently as their eyes met across the table. She was not challenging him, yet her words carried weight, and in that quiet exchange a subtle tension grew, a push and pull of power, respect and something unspoken, something delicate but undeniable. Later, the king called her to the private chambers, a rare and significant gesture. The room was dimly lit, shadows flickering across the walls as the fire burned low. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, maintaining her composure. You have proven yourself capable, he said finally, his tone measured. Far more capable than I expected. She inclined her head slightly, her expression calm. I do what must be done, she replied. The kingdom requires more than force to survive. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, searching her face. You possess a quiet power, one that I cannot yet understand. Are you aware of it? I am aware, she said simply. But it is not mine alone. It belongs to what must protect, what must endure. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, and the room seemed suspended between night and possibility. The king realized that her power was not just strength or skill. It was restraint, patience, and intelligence. It was the kind of power that could shape the fate of a kingdom without a single sword raised. Days passed, and the court grew restless. The shadows in the north were no longer whispers, but undeniable presence. Creatures that should not exist appeared at the borders, testing the limits of the kingdom's defenses. The young woman insisted on accompanying the next expedition, and this time the king allowed it without hesitation. He would witness her strength firsthand. The journey through the northern hills was harsh. Mist clung to the trees, and the wind carried an unnatural chill. The group moved cautiously, guided by her observations and intuition. When they reached a clearing, they found symbols carved into the ground, glowing faintly with magic that seemed older than time itself. She knelt, her hands tracing the lines of power, her eyes narrowing in concentration. The king watched silently, noting her careful movements and quiet authority. It was no longer simply curiosity that drew his attention. He felt something deeper, an acknowledgement that she was no ordinary woman, that her presence was vital not only to the survival of the kingdom but perhaps to his own soul. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the clearing. The soldiers tensed, but she stood calmly, her gaze fixed on the figure emerging from the mist. It was a creature of darkness, tall and imposing, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The men hesitated, unsure how to act, but she raised her hand and spoke softly. The creature paused as if listening, its movements slowing under the force of her calm authority. The king's pulse quickened. Few had ever faced such a presence without fear, and even fewer had commanded it. She did not strike, did not wield force, she commanded understanding. And the creature, sensing the truth of her intent, retreated into the shadows. The group returned to the palace in silence, the forest behind them still echoing with the memory of shadows and magic. The king walked beside her, words unspoken but heavy between them. He realized that she had changed everything, not just the expedition's success, but the way he viewed the world, the court, and even himself. At night, he found himself walking through the halls of the palace, seeking the quiet reassurance of her presence. She was in the gardens as if waiting for him. The moonlight fell upon her face, and for a fleeting moment he glimpsed the full depth of her hidden brilliance. Not the brilliance of beauty alone, but of spirit, courage, and mind. You are different from all I have known, he said quietly, standing beside her. And you are different as well, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. Perhaps that is why our paths have crossed. He looked at her, searching her expression, feeling the weight of unspoken truths. They were connected by more than duty or prophecy. There was an understanding, a recognition of power and potential, and something delicate yet profound growing between them. The nights that followed were filled with preparation. The kingdom needed vigilance, and the shadow in the north was not yet gone. The young woman worked alongside the king, guiding him through strategy and foresight. Each day he saw more of her strength, more of her insight, and more of the courage that defied expectation. He had believed he was marrying an ordinary woman, someone beneath his notice. Yet now he understood how completely wrong he had been. One evening, as they reviewed maps in the quiet of the library, the king spoke with uncharacteristic openness. You have opened my eyes to much I had not seen. Not just the kingdom's weaknesses, but its potential, and yours. I did not anticipate this. She smiled faintly, a small curve of lips that did not betray arrogance. Potential must be recognized before it can be used. And I am not the only one with potential. The king leaned back, considering her words. He realized that this partnership, this unexpected alliance, was more than strategy. It was a meeting of minds, a collision of strength and wisdom that neither could have anticipated. And in that realization he felt something new, anticipation, and perhaps even admiration that was beginning to tip toward something deeper. As night fell, they walked through the gardens together, their steps silent on the stone paths. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and earth. For a moment the world seemed suspended, waiting for what would come next. The shadows lingered at the edges of the garden, reminders that danger was never far, that the kingdom's trials were only beginning. And yet, for the first time, the Alpha King felt a spark of something unfamiliar, hope. Not hope that he would survive or that the kingdom would endure, but hope that he had found someone capable of standing beside him, someone whose presence could illuminate even the darkest of nights. The young woman paused at the edge of the fountain, her reflection shimmering in the water. She did not speak, yet her eyes conveyed a quiet determination. She had come to this palace expecting challenge, and she had found it. But she had also found something unexpected, a man who, despite his power, was capable of being changed. And she knew in the depths of her being that this change, this connection, would alter both of their destinies. The moon rose higher, casting silver light over stone and water. Somewhere in the shadows, the whisper of ancient magic stirred, as if aware that a new force had awakened in the kingdom. The Alpha King, once unshakable, felt the weight of uncertainty and the pull of something he could neither command nor resist. And the young woman, steady and unwavering, prepared for the trials yet to come, knowing that her strength would be tested, and that the path before them was fraught with danger and revelation. The kingdom had begun to breathe again, though not fully. Shadows lingered at its edges, reminders that the dark forces beyond the northern hills were patient, cunning, and relentless. The Alpha King, once the unchallenged master of his realm, now felt a strange unease in his chest, a restlessness that no strategy or blade could quiet. The young woman who had come quietly into his life had changed the rhythm of his days. Her presence was steady, thoughtful, and unexpectedly commanding, and he found himself relying on her insight more than he cared to admit. It was early morning when the council gathered in the great hall. The sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting colored patterns across stone floors. The air smelled faintly of incense and damp stone, a mixture that reminded him of the old world before the storms and curses had crept into the kingdom. The king sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid and his expression calm. The young woman stood beside him, reviewing the reports of scouts who had returned from the borderlands. Shadows are growing stronger, she said softly, her eyes scanning the parchment. They move with purpose. We cannot ignore them, and we cannot face them as if they are mere beasts. There is strategy in their actions, the advisors murmured, some skeptical, some afraid. Few understood the weight of her words or the depth of her reasoning. The king, however, listened intently. He had come to trust her judgment, though he still struggled to admit it fully, even to himself. Her quiet strength was unsettling in the best way. forcing him to reconsider his own authority and the assumptions he had carried for years. When the council ended, the king motioned for her to follow him to the palace gardens. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet stone. Torches lined the paths, their flames flickering in the morning breeze. He remained silent as they walked, each step measured and deliberate. "You are unlike anyone I have known," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "You see things others cannot, and yet you do not seek praise." "Why?" She paused, looking up at him with calm, unflinching eyes. "Because what is done for recognition is seldom done well. What is done out of necessity, out of duty, and out of understanding lasts." He studied her, noting the clarity in her expression, the unwavering resolve in her voice. He had ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and faced countless threats, yet here was someone who challenged him without defiance, who guided him without overt authority. And he felt for the first time in many years that he might be learning something profound, not just about the kingdom, but about himself. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The young woman worked alongside the king, studying maps, consulting with scouts, and organizing patrols along the northern border. She moved with quiet efficiency, noticing details that others overlooked. A shift in the wind, a pattern in the tracks of animals, the subtle echoes of magic lingering in the earth. Her insight was precise, measured, and effective, earning her a growing respect from the soldiers and advisors. Even the courtiers who had once mocked her now watched silently, realizing that she possessed a power beyond mere appearances. One evening, a messenger arrived with urgent news. Shadows had gathered in force at the edge of the northern hills, and a patrol had been caught in their midst. Several men were missing, their fate uncertain. The king's jaw tightened, and he exchanged a brief glance with the young woman. She did not hesitate. "We leave tonight," she said firmly. "Delay will cost more lives, and we must understand what we are facing before it grows stronger." The king nodded. He could see the determination in her eyes, the quiet courage that refused to yield. For the first time, he did not feel the need to command or assert his authority. He simply followed, knowing that together they were stronger than either alone. The night was dark and still as they moved through the forest. Mist clung to the trees, curling around their ankles and masking their movements. The young woman led with quiet confidence, noting the signs of passage, the subtle disturbances in the air, and the faint shimmer of magic that lingered on the edges of their vision. The soldiers followed, tense but obedient, sensing the authority in her presence. Suddenly, a shadow darted between the trees. The men raised their weapons, but she held up a hand. "Wait, observe first," she whispered. The shadow moved again, and this time it became clear. It was not human. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its movements were deliberate, intelligent. The king stepped forward, placing himself beside her. "Do you trust it?" he asked quietly. "I do," she replied, "but we must respect it, not attack blindly. Violence is not always the answer." The creature paused, tilting its head as if considering their presence. The young woman stepped closer, her voice calm, measured, and firm. "We do not seek harm. Leave this place and you will not be pursued." For a long moment the forest was still. The tension was palpable, and even the soldiers held their breath. Then slowly the creature retreated, melting into the mist. The king exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and admiration. Few had ever faced such a being and lived, let alone commanded it with respect rather than force. They returned to the palace with the dawn, exhausted but triumphant. The king did not speak of her courage publicly, though his mind was consumed by it. He had believed he was marrying an ordinary woman, someone beneath notice. Yet now he understood the depth of her strength, the quiet brilliance that had eluded even his sharp perception. In the following days, their bond deepened, not through words or overt declarations, but through shared purpose and understanding. She guided the palace's defenses, studied ancient texts, and anticipated the movements of the shadows in ways that astonished even the most experienced advisors. And the king, for the first time in many years, allowed himself to trust another completely. One night, the king summoned her to the library. The air was warm with the glow of candlelight, and the shelves towered above them, filled with the knowledge of generations. He gestured to a table scattered with maps and scrolls. "You have changed much," he said quietly. "Not just the court, not just the soldiers, but me. I did not expect this." She looked at him calmly, her expression gentle yet unwavering. "Change is not always easy," she said, "but the world requires it. And sometimes those we least expect become the ones who shape the future. He studied her, feeling a mixture of admiration, respect, and something more he could not yet name. The connection between them was growing, subtle but undeniable, like a thread stretching taut between 2 points. It was not yet love, not yet trust, but it was the beginning of something that could alter the course of both their lives. As the night deepened, a faint glow shimmered along the edges of the library walls, almost imperceptible but present nonetheless. The king noticed it and stiffened slightly. He had come to recognize these signs, traces of magic, power, and potential. And though he did not speak, he knew that the young woman beside him was the source, the center of a force that could save or transform the kingdom. Days later, a celebration was held in the palace courtyard, a rare moment of light and music amidst the growing darkness. The courtiers and soldiers gathered, and for once the young woman allowed herself to smile, to enjoy the warmth of the gathering without pretense. The king watched her from a distance, noting the ease with which she moved among the people, the quiet respect she inspired without demanding it. And yet, even in this moment of reprieve, shadows lingered. The northern threat had not disappeared. It only waited, patient and watchful, for the right moment to strike. The king knew that their greatest challenge was still to come, but he also knew that he would not face it alone. The young woman had proven herself, not by the strength of her arms or the force of her will, but by the courage of her mind and the depth of her heart. That night, as the palace slept, the king found her in the gardens once more. Moonlight bathed the fountains in silver and the air was still. He approached quietly, noting the calm certainty in her stance, the way she seemed at peace even amidst uncertainty. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "And you have changed too," she replied. Her voice was gentle, but there was an edge of truth that could not be denied. "You see now what was hidden in plain sight?" He nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of her words. Their connection, forged in danger, patience, and shared purpose, had shifted something within him. And though he would not admit it, he felt the first stirrings of something deeper, something beyond respect and curiosity, an awareness of her importance to him, and to the kingdom itself. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a faint whisper of the northern shadows, a reminder that the trials were far from over. But for the first time the king did not feel fear. He felt anticipation, a cautious hope, and a growing realization that the young woman, whom he had once believed ordinary, was extraordinary in ways that would shape their destinies forever. The northern hills had grown restless. Shadows moved like living storms, and whispers of ancient magic drifted across the land. The Alpha King and the young woman stood at the palace walls, gazing toward the horizon where darkness gathered. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent promise of trials yet to come. For weeks they had prepared, gathering knowledge, training soldiers, and unraveling the mysteries of the forest's dark power, and yet the true nature of the threat remained uncertain. "You are ready," the king said quietly, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of command and concern. "I have seen your strength. I trust it. But are you truly ready for what lies ahead?" The young woman met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "I am ready," she said softly. "And not just for the fight. I am ready for what we must do to protect the kingdom and each other." He looked at her, realizing in that moment that her courage went far beyond physical skill. It was the courage to face uncertainty, to act with wisdom, and to trust herself and him despite the unknown. He had believed himself invincible, but in her presence, he understood a different kind of strength, the strength of patience, understanding, and quiet authority. That night, they rode toward the northern hills, a small, determined party moving with stealth and care. Mist clung to the forest, and the wind carried a chill that cut through even the warmest armor. The soldiers were tense, but they followed her lead, trusting the authority she projected without a word. The king rode beside her, alert to every movement, every whisper, every shadow that might conceal danger. As they entered the heart of the northern forest, the air thickened with magic. Ancient trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches reaching like claws toward the sky. Symbols of power etched into stones glowed faintly, and the soft hum of energy vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. The young woman moved carefully, reading the signs, interpreting the faint traces of spells, and guiding the group with quiet precision. Suddenly, a wave of darkness surged around them, Shadows coalesced into shapes tall and menacing, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The soldiers drew their weapons, but she raised a hand, signaling them to wait. The creatures advanced, but she did not falter. Her voice, calm and steady, cut through the tension. "Leave this place," she commanded, "or face the consequences of what you disturb." The shadows hesitated. A faint whispering echoed through the trees, ancient words that spoke of power and warning. And then, with a flicker of recognition, the creatures retreated, slipping back into the mist. The soldiers exhaled, and the king felt a mixture of awe and admiration. She had faced forces older than the kingdom itself, and she had commanded them with respect rather than force. As they pressed deeper into the forest, they discovered the source of the disturbance, a massive, ancient tree, its trunk twisted with age and magic, roots curling like serpents into the earth. Symbols glowed faintly along its bark, pulsing with energy that seemed to reach into the very air. The young woman approached carefully, her hands tracing the runes. "This is the source," she said softly. "The forest's heart. It has been corrupted, and the shadows serve it. If we heal it, the darkness will retreat. If we fail, the kingdom may not survive." The king stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Then we will succeed," he said. "Together." She nodded, and together they began the work of unraveling the corruption. Her hands moved with careful precision, tracing patterns, chanting words of old magic she had learned from the library's texts. The king supported her, lending his own strength and focus, channeling energy into the work. The air shimmered with power, and the shadows hissed and writhed as the ancient magic of the forest responded. Hours passed, and the struggle intensified. Darkness clawed at them, testing their resolve, threatening to overwhelm. The young woman's calm authority guided the soldiers, while the king's presence lent stability and protection. Together they created a circle of focus, a channel through which the forest's corrupted energy could be cleansed. Finally, with a burst of light and a sound like a deep sigh, the ancient tree shimmered, its dark energy dissolving into the earth. The shadows fled, retreating into the distant hills, and a profound silence settled over the forest. The danger had passed for now, and the kingdom was safe. The king and the young woman stood together in the clearing, their hands brushing briefly, their eyes meeting with a shared understanding. The danger had revealed something deeper than power. It had revealed the bond between them, forged through challenge, trust, and mutual respect. "You have changed everything," the king said quietly, his voice tinged with awe. "Not just the forest, not just the kingdom, but me," she smiled softly, a gentle curve that carried both warmth and strength. "We change each other," she replied. "That is how we survive, how we endure." For the first time, the king allowed himself to see her fully, not as a bride chosen for appearance, not as an ordinary woman, but as a partner, a guide, and a force of nature capable of shaping destiny. He realized how wrong he had been in his assumptions, how limited his understanding of strength and beauty had been. The return to the palace was quiet, reflective, and solemn. The soldiers moved with careful precision, but there was a sense of relief in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The young woman walked beside the king, her presence calm, commanding, and serene. She did not need words to assert her importance. It was evident in every step, every glance, every measured movement. That evening, the king led her to the palace balcony, where the city stretched out beneath them, lights flickering like stars against the darkening sky. He stood close, their shoulders nearly touching, and he finally allowed himself to speak the words he had long restrained. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. "I believed I knew strength, wisdom, and courage, and yet you have shown me something far beyond what I imagined. You are extraordinary." Her eyes softened, reflecting the silver light of the moon. "And you are more than I imagined," she said. "I believed you were a man of power, unyielding and rigid. But I see now that you can bend, that you can trust, and that you can recognize what is hidden in plain sight." The king looked at her, seeing not just her bravery and wisdom, but the subtle grace and intelligence that had carried them through darkness. He realized that in the process of surviving the shadows, he had found something he had long denied himself: companionship, understanding, and perhaps even a quiet love that did not need words to define it. For a moment, they stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of earth and rain, the distant echo of the forest still whispering through the hills. The kingdom was safe, the shadows had been repelled, and the bond between them had solidified in ways that would endure far beyond the night. The king took a deep breath. "I believed I was marrying an ordinary woman," he said softly, "and yet I see now that I have been given someone extraordinary, someone who has changed my world." She looked at him, her expression calm but filled with a quiet strength. "And you have changed mine," she replied. "We have faced darkness together and we have endured. That is what makes us stronger." The stars shimmered above them, distant and eternal, as if witnessing the quiet transformation of two lives intertwined by fate and courage. The Alpha King, once certain of his own authority and knowledge, now understood that strength came not only from power but from partnership, respect, and the courage to recognize brilliance where it was least expected. And in that moment, he realized that the bride he had once underestimated, the so-called ugly duckling, had become the heart of the kingdom, the calm in the storm, and the force that would shape not just his destiny, but the future of all who lived under his rule. The kingdom slept beneath a moonlit sky, safe for the first time in many weeks. And the Alpha King and his extraordinary bride, standing together on the balcony, knew that while challenges would always arise, they would face them as one, bound by trust, understanding, and a connection deeper than any shadow could touch. The night was quiet yet alive with possibility. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the northern hills, the faint echo of ancient magic lingered, waiting for the next moment when courage, wisdom, and partnership would be called upon to protect the realm. But for now they had prevailed, and in their triumph, the Alpha King understood a truth he would never forget. Appearances deceive, strength manifests in many forms, and the most extraordinary power often lies in the heart and mind of the unexpected.